You're listening to Breaking the Silence on the Fight the Lies Radio Network. Hi, and welcome to Breaking the Silence, Episode 7. This is the second and final part of my interview with Tyrone Barnes. I want to apologize to everyone for the length of time it's taken for me to get this posted. I had hoped it would be a bit sooner, but as usual, things are busy. But hopefully this reaches a good final conclusion for everyone. I do believe it's still very timely as we still continue to have various things going on in the headlines each and every day. I really very much enjoyed this conversation with Tyrone and gotten some pretty good feedback on it so far. And I think that we really did touch on some very important points. There's a lot of stuff that could have been fleshed out more, but given the limitations of life and time and all of that, I think we did a fairly good job at getting these thoughts out there. Really, the whole point to me was us being in the midst of all these things to just sort of have a rational conversation about it, get some different points of view that maybe would just give people some food for thought. So, as usual, thanks to everyone for listening. Thanks for continuing to share your time with me. So without further ado, here's part 2. It's purposeful. I mean, we see it It's all reflected in the media. There was a conference, and this sort of touches on that, but more specifically in the racial division that I want to say it was about 3 years ago. There was a National Teachers Conference where they talked about specifically, it was sort of the marching orders that are given teachers nationally. Okay. And one of the emphasis on it was the sort of ideas that they put out there, like the phrase white privilege. But one of the other things, and this has become a cultural meme now that we hear in the media, and I noticed it after this conference, was this idea that white people are inherently racist, that even if they haven't said anything racial or if they haven't done anything racist, that by their own, quote, privileged status, they're racist. And this was one of the things, and I wish I could remember some of the other points, but this was one of the things they were basically instructed teachers at this national conference to basically structure their teachings by and to disseminate out to their students.
That's terrible.
And since then, I've heard these accounts about that. Different places around the country where parents are talking about, hey, my kid come home from school and he's saying these things, and I started talking to him about it, and he said the teacher told him this. And so, you know, it's by design. It's something that's certainly focused on. It's not just happenstance. It's not just, you know, ignorant people. Well, we could say they are ignorant to the real truth, but I mean, it's not uneducated people. And it goes beyond the things that are in entertainment, which in and of itself is bad enough. It's certainly this sort of unified thing that's going on. And I heard that at a university level, I can't remember who it was, but a certain person I was listening to did a call in on one of the shows I listened to. And he was talking about his daughter who was going off to university. And as soon as she got in there, I mean, they were immediately not only on the racial issue, but they were pretty much flat out saying, look, your worldview is totally wrong. Your worldview, according to race, look, you're a racist, and you need to embrace this idea that because you're white, you are inherently bad, you're inherently racist, and you essentially, I'm paraphrasing it, but you essentially need to repent of it and be ashamed of it. But then they took that further and linked it to their Christian views and said that was inherently bad, that was part of the reason why they were racist was because of their Christian worldview.
Oh, my goodness.
And this was at a national university. I can't remember which one it was, but it was a very, very recognizable one. And essentially what ended up happening was that daughter ended up deciding that she did not even want to go.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
And went back home and went to, some local college.
That is so terrible. Yeah, that is, like I said, that kind of mentality is itself racist. I do not understand how people think that they can combat the evil of racism with more racism. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to fight what they take to be supposed or implicit racism with actual and explicit racism, and somehow thinking that that's making things even better. It doesn't. It makes people guilty for reasons that they're not guilty for. You're not guilty for being white. You haven't done anything wrong just because you're white. You're not guilty of anything because you're white. And all the elements that supposedly tie into what they use to try to support the idea of white privilege is constantly being refuted. I mean, I even see it in my own personal experience that the white people that I've come across are anything but privileged compared to me. Like I said, I was friends with a lot of white people when I was in college, and even after we graduated from college, a lot of them did not do so well in their job hunts nearly as well as I did. One of my very good friends, who as white as sour cream, she was... The last time I spoke with her, she was struggling to work as a short order cook at a retirement home. And meanwhile, I was discussing near six-figure job while standing in the courtyard of our nation's Department of Defense building.
Wow.
So how in the world can anybody look at that kind of situation, granted as anecdotal as it may be, how can anyone look at that situation and say that she's privileged simply because she's white and I'm underprivileged or I'm disadvantaged just because I'm black, looking at our lifestyle situations? It really is an anti-intellectual mentality to hold.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that came to my mind as you were saying that. I think part of that could be attributed to going back to the conversation I had with your mom, and we were talking about Dr. Ben Carson. And I've always admired him since I first heard about him and his testimony and how his mom sacrificed so much and told him, you're not defined by where you're at now. You're not defined by these things, that you can be whatever you want to be. And so talking to your mom, I see that, she told me that she had always talked about that and used that as an example to you guys.
Yes.
And I mean, that's just such an awesome thing, man. And that's what's so tragic that's what breaks my heart when I see these people out there, and I can understand how they feel and how they've gotten to this place where they're looking at other people and saying, well, you've got this and I don't have that. And it's because of this hatred against me, when in reality, they are really being enslaved by their own beliefs.
Right.
I mean, kept down by their own beliefs. And I'm not saying it's simple. It's a hard thing to crawl up out of a dark place.
Yes, it is.
But in a sense, it is simple to begin the process.
Yes.
It's as simple as seeing and knowing that, man, there is hope, that look, I'll point out all day long the errors in our country.
Oh, yeah.
But we live in a situation in a country that we have more freedom than probably any other nation on earth has ever experienced.
That is very arguable.
Even though we can also say today so much of that freedom is being stripped away.
Exactly. That's the scary thing. I think many of the commentators, the social commentators that I regularly listen to, say something that is absolutely shocking to me, even, no matter how many times I hear about it. This is probably the first generation of young people that is actively fighting to take away people's rights, that is actively fighting to make people less free rather than more free. You look at past generations of young people, they were always advocating for more liberty, freedom, whether it was, freedom in education or sexual freedom or any other kinds of freedom or freedom of speech or freedom of study or whatever that may be. This is the first generation of people that is actually trying to take away people's freedoms. They're trying to take away our rights to free speech. They're trying to take away our rights to freedom of religion or freedom of association. And there are explicit and very concrete examples of this. And it is terrifying, the kind of, as many of these commentators say, fascism that this generation is not only being instilled with, but is actively carrying out.
Yes, I agree. And I would even say we, as more broadly as a society, we've all done that to some degree. And I mean, I'll use the example now, whatever sort of further explanation one wants to come up with concerning this is another thing altogether. But that being said, 9/11.
Yes.
Ever since 9/11, we as a nation, we have collectively given up more and more freedoms. I see that as a very defining moment in this, what you're talking about. And I mean, it does go back further than that.
Yes.
But I think the sort of, as you would say, taking it to the next level, I think it really sort of, as a nation, it really sort of kicked into high gear there. Yeah. And ultimately, simply because of fear. We could argue all day long about, well, what measures needed to be taken and how ineffective things like the TSA are and things like that. And I'm not trying to go down that path. But my point there being is that I think we all, you said this current generation, and I definitely agree. We see it manifested very strongly in the current generation. But I think all of us have, to some degree or another, for a very long time, have been doing that. And I think anytime we give ourselves over to fear, we're essentially giving up our freedom, because now we're going to run to someone else to protect us. And I think there's a great historical example. I've tried to use this to point it out to people before, and I don't want to go down a rabbit trail, but having a Messianic background myself, in Messianic Judaism, one of the things that anybody in Messianic Judaism really seems to be focused on is this appreciation for the support of Israel. And it's very popular in Christianity today, right? One of the common verses you'll hear quoted is God's promise to Abraham. I'll bless he who blesses you and curse he who curses you. Right. And there's a lot of thoughts I have out of that. And one of the thoughts that I came to is that Israel does not need another nation to bless and protect them to keep them safe. They need God to.
Yes.
And I question the greater body of Christianity in America's motivations in doing what they're doing in, quote, blessing Israel. Is it because they have this genuine love for Israel, or is it because they want the blessings Dad's going to give them for doing that, right?
Right.
And this is where I go back to my historical example, because with Israel, there was this pattern that I noticed. And that is, if you go back to the division between the north and the south in Israel, and the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And of course, the northern kingdom went completely apostate, right? And God, spoke through the prophets and said he was going to judge them. And then, of course, he used the Syrians and the Babylonians as his tool for judgment, right?
Right.
And then, of course, eventually the southern kingdom also was judged in the same way. And what happened in the aftermath of that, though, was as time progressed and they returned back to Israel and rebuilt the temple and all of that, and they had this fear of it happening again. So what they ended up doing was, when Alexander the Great came on the scene and started conquering everyone, they wanted him to protect them against the Assyrians, and they invited them into Israel to be their protectors. And what, of course, ended up happening out of that was the story of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt, and the whole story that's told in the story of Hanukkah. They started assimilating themselves to the Greek lifestyle. They admired it so much. They were so sophisticated and advanced. Right. And, there's stories about reverse circumcision, which I don't know how you do that. And I don't want to know. I don't want to know, because it doesn't sound pleasant. No. And what happened out of that? They were oppressed and enslaved and forbidden to read the Torah, and forbidden to speak in Hebrew, and forbidden to worship at the temple. And this defilement happened. And all these things. And then eventually, of course, they got free from that. And then what happened was they invited the Romans to come in to do the same thing that they invited the Greeks to do, because they wanted to be protected against them.
Exactly.
And then, of course, you know what happened with that.
Of course.
And so it's this consistent pattern that goes to today, and where I look at it now, and I'm not saying America's Rome or whatever, but we're filling that same role. And of course, if you look at the compromises, like giving up the Gaza Strip, and look at what's come out of that. And anyways, my point being with that whole entire thing, though, is that we as a people are doing the same thing Israel's done.
Yeah, in a similar way, and just getting back to the topic at hand, and the way that the black community is doing this and siding with these leftists and these political Democrats who want to place so much dependency on welfare and the government. We are giving ourselves over to a system that really cannot adequately care for us in the same way that we can care for ourselves. It's something that builds so much dependency on government handouts, whether it's through the welfare state or through bailouts or through special privilege for mortgage loans or credit score leniencies that are being handed out, is that ultimately it is holding us back. I remember reading just recently in the educational system that there are a number of colleges and universities now that are doing something where they are profiling people's races and adding or subtracting to their SAT scores. Now that it's on a score of 1,600, they're adding or subtracting a certain number of scores on the basis of the ethnicity of the student. So if you're a black student, they will add, I think, 230 points to your final score. If you're a Latino or Hispanic student, they'll add 180 points to your final score. And the funny thing is, if you're Asian, they'll take off 50 points from your final score. Even if you come from a disenfranchised background, they're still going to do that because Asian Americans have been outperforming even whites academically and financially by a significant margin for many, many years now. And of course, in the leftist mentality, that can't be due to their, just putting the pedal to the metal, making good decisions with their lives and reaping the rewards. It has to be due to some sort of unearned privilege. And so we got to counteract that privilege by taking away the points that they rightfully earned through academic success. And not only is this an explicit violation of a fundamental principle of academic integrity, it also greatly hampers people from being able to do their best in the educational field, because they know that even if they screw up royally, the government or the system is going to bail them out because they're a part of a protected class of some sort.
And ultimately, it's crushing to those people, because what happens when you get out in the real world and you truly do have to fend for yourself? And one of the things that came to my mind is the evil that existed in the 1800s, well, actually going back to the 1600s even, with black enslavement in America. And what's happening today really is no different. And back then, I remember there were conflicts between black people who wanted to be free, and therefore they were no longer going to have the support of, I hate to use the term, but it's the term that was used, of their master. And they're going to have to go out and, find food and find livelihood for themselves. And then the other side were the blacks who wanted to remain in that situation because they were taken care of. And I've never thought of that before, and I just thought about that as you were talking, that's really what we see today. And these people who would be totally opposed to being in an enslaved state are in fact embracing enslavement.
They're crippling themselves for life, basically. They're being asked to be held aloft because they think that they cannot walk on their own, and it really is discouraging to everybody who looks at this and says, well, okay, if I'm being victimized and there's no way I'm going to get out of this, right? I'm forever a victim, and someone is always going to have to carry me, and I'm never going to be able to walk on my own two legs. And of course, that's the exact kind of mentality that people like Ben Carson, and even going back, people like Booker T. Washington fought against that kind of mentality. Like, no, you should be able to take advantage of all the opportunities that are being presented to you and make the best of them of what you can do. And so often, that is precisely what far too many individual members in the black community are not doing. They are not taking advantage of the opportunities that are being presented to them. And there are a bevy of advantages that are being offered to us. I mean, right now, my oldest sister, who's 17, she's applying to go to college now. And she's thinking about majoring in computer science. And considering the fact that she's 1, black and 2, female, it's going to be depressingly easy for her to get scholarships to be able to get into a STEM program with that kind of a background. And I just pray that I'm pretty certain that we're not going to let her get away with not taking advantage of that opportunity. We would not let her rest a single wink if we found out that she was not taking advantage of those opportunities. So seeing that so many people are not taking advantage of that, as so many other ethnic groups are, even though they're less advantaged, and then wondering, why am I not successful as those other people? Well, because you didn't do the same things that they did with the opportunities that have been given to them, that have been given to you as well.
Yeah, I think it's truly tragic, as I was sort of saying earlier, how free we are in this country and how many blessings we have. And you see this potential for so many of these people to have a wonderful life and to be, I mean, you know, who knows, the next Einstein or whatever. And yet they're totally in this state that they can't get out of. And I hate to say people are keeping themselves in that state, but the beliefs they've embraced are. And of course,
yes,
ultimately
absolutely.
You have to take responsibility for embracing those beliefs and not looking in another direction. And I think what's sad, you know, for the other side of things, because there's certainly responsibility on the other side. And this is where I get so often onto, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on to talk, is one of the processes I see happening so much that those who want to keep their power-based secure practice is what's called the dialectical process. You take two opposites and pit them against each other. And I always try to refuse to allow myself to get into that process. And where I'm going with that is the other side, people who, on a lot of points, they're right. Like your average conservative person who would say, well, these people, they don't want to work and they don't want to do this and that. And they're out there protesting and yada, yada, yada. But it's like you could say that and you could be right on some points. But what are you doing to reach out in truth and in love to those people?
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time, if those people don't want to be helped, they're not going to be helped no matter what you do.
Well, and that's true. And certainly you can't go out and go to like some protest and say, man, I love you and yada, 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 while that person's trying to bash you with something. Exactly. That's for sure. But I mean, I think in all things, and this applies to so much in life, yeah, I think we really have to step back and be balanced. And I mean, ultimately, for people like you and me who are believers, yes, we do really have to look at it through, you know, Yeshua's eyes. We have to look at it through a biblical view and have his, you know, just like he looked at, you know, any number of people that we're given the example of and had compassion and mercy for them. The woman who got caught in adultery, for example, they wanted her to be stoned, and he looked at her and wanted her to be free from her sin.
Yes.
And, you know, had mercy on her and told her, hey, go on and don't sin anymore. And I think that people like you and me and so many others who would call themselves believers, I think we have to really strive to have those eyes. And it is so hard today because the climate is so inflammatory, toxic. Yeah, and toxic. You see it as well as I. You go on social media, and it's just, I mean, it's one thing after another. Let's jump on the next offense train, you know?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's like people live to be offended. That's what it's all about. Like, there are oftentimes when I listen to people who hold to this leftist mentality and just listen to them talk amongst themselves, it's like a spectator sport to see who can pose as the biggest victim. It's like, that's all that matters to them is, I've been victimized, so give me stuff. Oftentimes, it's like we've been saying this last few times, is our wish to be crippled so that other people can do our work for us. Because if we really think about it, and I've been holding this view for a while now, and I've yet to hear anything that counteracts this thought. I honestly think that the greatest threats to the Black community today are internal and not external. Now, the biggest problems that are going on with that demographic in this country is really the fault of their own doing. Because there was just take the position of poverty. I've always held the view when it comes to, earnings inequality or inequality of wealth. I've always held the view that I don't have a problem with the fact that some people make more money than others, because this is a capitalistic society and a competitive society. And when you live in a capitalistic, competitive society, some people are going to make more money than others. It's just like if you look at any kind of a sports competition, some teams are going to win more games than others. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with the fact is poverty, is the fact that some people are not making enough money to get along. And the great thing about this country, and this is something that is recognized by both the right and the left, thank the Lord. And there was, I think it's called Brookings Institute, which is a left-leaning institute. They came to this realization through their studies that there are 3 things you need to do in order to ensure that you're not perpetually poor in this country. 3 things you need to do. Finish high school, get a job, and don't get pregnant before you get married. Those 3 things, if you do those 3 things, you're pretty much guaranteed that you will not be perpetually poor in this country. And the reason why so many black people are in such a sad state of affairs in the inner cities and in urban areas is because so many of them are not doing at least 2 of those things. Many of them are dropping out of high school. It's not that the high schools are forcing them to drop out. The high schools, so many high schools are actually bending over backwards to encourage people of color to come to their places and get a proper education. But so many individuals in the black communities in these areas are deliberately dropping out of high school. And good Lord, the single motherhood rate in the black community could honestly be considered something of an epidemic. It was about the rate of single motherhood in the black community back in 1960 was about 20%. Today, it is almost 75% of black Americans who are born to single mothers. And I think you and I and anybody who has looked into that matter, and even President Obama in his better moments, has remarked upon the intrinsic link between single motherhood and all of the other social and civil disadvantages that comes with that. Children who grow up in fatherless homes or to single mothers are more likely to live in poverty. They're more likely to drop out of high school. They're more likely to get involved in crime and substance abuse, and they're more likely to go to prison and more likely to have children out of wedlock themselves and continue the cycle. And it may very well be the case that ever since the civil rights movements, the nature of dependency on the welfare state in the black community has come to the point that so many of the people in that community have been incentivized to make really, really bad decisions because they know that the state is going to support them no matter what stupid decisions that they make. And as a result, they're reaping the benefits, they're reaping the rewards of their errors and still blaming other people for those errors. It's really a tragic, like as we've been saying, a self-crippling state of mind.
Yeah, you know, my example personally that comes to my mind is, for me, I lived that to some extent because my father started 5 businesses over many years from nothing. Unfortunately, one could, on one hand, brag about that. He started 5 businesses from nothing, but that means he lost 4 businesses. You know what I mean? But right. One of the things was, man, I always knew my dad was there to back me up. And when I got to be an adult, I'll be honest with you, man, my dad, there was a lot of bad things in the background. My dad was alcoholic and different things like that. And he wasn't around very much. And I subconsciously, and I think this sort of applies, I'm just using my personal example here. I subconsciously took advantage of his guilt as he came out of that. I know on a subconscious level, looking back, that I said to myself, well, he's going to help me out because of his guilt. So therefore, I don't have a lot of motivation to get out here and do this or that. And in the 90s, me and him had a business together, and I had it way too good, to be honest with you. Now, I did start going to college during those years because at some point I decided, like a lot of guys, hey, I want to be my own man. And that's a whole nother story. But the tragic thing that I had to learn the hard way was that I had become far too dependent upon that crutch of always falling back to, well, my dad's got a business and I can always fall back to that if everything else fails. And then what happened in 99 when my dad passed away was that the house and everything was tied into the business. So we, as a family, lost everything and had to start over. And I had promised to my dad, and I trust that he heard me, though he wasn't conscious, that I was going to, my goal in life was I was going to take care of mom and my sister, which really was what made me finally become a man at the age of 27. And life is like a chain. And if we take any link out of the chain, the whole thing falls apart. And so I learned, you know what, I can think back in my mental time machine and want to undo the past, but it is what it is. And I am who I am because of it.
Yes.
But at the same time, I can look back and say, man, I could be in such a better position in life if it wasn't for all that foolishness. And my point being to all that sort of personal story there is that I see that my example played out in exactly what you're talking about. It's just instead of your own literal physical father, we have Big Daddy, the government. And, when that comes crashing down and we see that so much since, 2008, 2009 with the first financial crisis. When that finally comes crashing down, man, there are going to be so many people that have so much less than they have today. I mean, if we look at the bottom percentile range in America, the poorest of the poor, they have things, and I know this is sort of a ambiguous term to use, but they have things so much better than the poor in other countries. Like if we look at the rest of the world, I remember hearing this statistic at one time. I couldn't tell you what it is now. I'd be using a inaccurate number if I threw one out there today. But the majority of the rest of the world do not have access to an ice cube. You go to most foreign countries and you get a soda, you don't get any ice in it.
Yeah.
I
think someone once told me that if you had the advantage of taking a shower this morning, you're doing better than 90% of the world.
Yeah, and we take that for granted. And I'm not saying that people don't have some terrible situations in our country, And I mean, I know there's families that live off like freaking ramen noodles and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But
I did for a while. That was college, and that's college. That's
a lot of us did during those years, man. Of course, with me anyways, a lot of it was self-imposed, but that's a whole nother story. But I think, and so not to take anything away from people's state they're in, but I mean, we do lose perspective on how it is in the rest of the world, and we forget about that here in America. And it's almost like the kid living in the family that has, they got the TV in every room and they got the Xbox and whatever else, and they've got dinner every night, and they're looking at some other family that's got things they don't have, and they're thinking themselves as poor. And they're not looking down the street and seeing the family that's living in an alley,
Exactly.
And they don't appreciate what they have. And I'm not saying that, these people that are in these poor states should appreciate what they have and suck it up. I'm not saying that at all. But another thing that come on mind that's unrelated, well, it is related to the conversation, but talking about in the inner cities in the Black community. And one of the things I've tried to talk to people about before is how, you're talking about teen pregnancy rates. And I've gotten in arguments with, and I can understand where they're coming from and why they have this view, but I've gotten in arguments with some Black females before who are totally for abortion.
Oh my.
And it's because they look at the world around them and the people they see around them, and they see these single females having multiple kids, and they see them perpetually living on welfare and all these other things. And well, let me pause right there and say there are white populations that are doing the exact same thing. Go to West Virginia sometime. It's a sad state, but it's not exclusive to Black people by any means. But anyways, that being said, is that I've gotten in these arguments with people, and they're like totally for abortion and even for sterilization. Like,
wow,
government mandated. And I know in history, I've tried to go and explain to them, well, do you realize what eugenics is? And do you realize there was an active movement in America that you mentioned it earlier, Jim Crow laws? California, it was huge, and Virginia, it was huge, to where African Americans and especially also Native Americans had forced sterilizations, had forced abortions, all these different things. And Hitler attributed his inspiration to the eugenics movement in America for the very things he imposed. And the mother of Planned Parenthood is Margaret Sanger, who was a leader in the eugenics movement. And there's pictures of that woman at KKK rallies, for crying out loud. And an interesting side note is that Hillary Clinton attributes as one of her heroes Margaret Sanger.
That is terrifying. And that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of surprised that, black people who constantly root their oppression in their history don't know the history that the Klansman was supported by the Democratic Party.
Yes.
That slavery was mainly supported by the Democratic Party. That the Democratic Party, for many, many, many stretches of our country's history, were deliberately the enemies of the black man, of the black person. So it really seems like we've been struck with a severe case of Stockholm syndrome to an extent. And this is one of the reasons why, one of the multitudinous reasons why I have such a big problem with the Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, I am not at all opposed to the sentiment that Black Lives Matter. Being a black man myself, I'm rather compelled to agree. But it is the hashtag or the movement that I find so deeply troublesome in so many ways. And one of those reasons is that so many supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement are also supporters of abortion, recognizing the fact that black Americans have more abortions per capita than any other ethnic group in this country. I mean, just last year in New York City, I think it was, more black children were aborted than ones who were born.
Yes, I heard that statistic.
That is absolutely unacceptable. If you honestly hold the view that Black Lives Matter, why would you not think that they matter unconditionally, even in the womb? You don't get to say that Black Lives Matter when your stance on abortion shows that you don't even think that life itself matters if it proves to be inconvenient.
Yes, I mean, the most innocent of life, and you're for obliterating it.
Yeah, that's an entire generation of black Americans that were wiped clean from the face of the earth at the hands of their own mothers.
Yeah, I don't know the statistics, but I would say it's very, very safe to say that since Roe versus Wade, that the vast majority of those abortions have been black Americans.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And, and that's one of the things I was getting to in my thought process in talking about eugenics and really all the things that we're talking about is that you have to take a moment and think about it and wonder, as you were talking about, like, for example, the Democratic Party, and by no means is it exclusive to the Democrats. My political view is that the Democratic and Republican parties are not unlike the good guy and bad guy wrestlers on, quote, professional wrestling.
Exactly.
This month, this guy's the bad guy and this guy's the good guy. 6 months from now, the roles are reversed.
Exactly.
But that being said, anyways, you have to really question and wonder if the situation was such that it goes back to that old adage, if you can't beat them, join them. If you can't beat them, co-opt them and destroy them from within. And I really do wonder, most all of the Planned Parenthood abortion clinics are located in inner cities and in black communities.
There is a Planned Parenthood office within walking distance of my very apartment right now.
Wow. Like I said, look at who the mother of the Planned Parenthood organization is. Margaret Sanger, who was for forced abortions, forced sterilizations. And of course, it wasn't just racial. It was also if someone had, if someone was viewed as being mentally inferior or whatever. I heard this testimony from this one woman. No, I'm sorry. It wasn't from a woman. It was from a man. He's in a ministry now. And through his testimony, he said he was actually adopted, that his real mother, she was forcibly sterilized after he was born.
Oh, my.
And she ended up committing suicide as a consequence. Her mother forced the abortion on her, and this was during that era because they had her son, which would have been his real mother's brother, he was deemed mentally retarded, and they said it was genetic. And of course, you're talking about the 20s and 30s. They don't know anything about genetics really then. And it come to find out it was because the childbirthing process was done so badly in the hospital that he experienced oxygen deprivation and therefore got brain damage.
Oh, no.
So the mother actually found that out, and that's what triggered her committing suicide. Anyways, it's a rabbit trail here, but it's just one of the many tragedies that came out of that era. And now today, if those people's, some would say religion, was to control the population and to weed out those who are deemed lesser, just like the Nazis did, then one could make the case that those people didn't just vanish from the face of the earth. They just changed their clothing, they changed their uniforms, they changed the things they said. And one could make the case that they continue on today, and while they smile in your face and say, we love you and we're here to help you, in the meantime, what they're really doing is putting a knife in your back.
Exactly.
And I'm of the firm opinion that's one of the things that's happening to the black community today, and that's what infuriates me. Because people are buying these lies from these people who in reality hate them.
Yeah.
While they say they love them.
There's a book that's on my read list right now called Please Stop Helping Us, How the Left is Actually Preventing the Black Community from Succeeding. And just the title alone gives a pretty good, clear-cut idea of its thesis statement that so many things that the political left and the Democratic Party are trying to do, quote unquote, to help the black community is actually hampering it. And eventually, if it has its way, will totally kill it off. And we're buying into it, wholesale without any time for reflection or criticism, which also explains to me why the left also doesn't like critical thinking all that much. Because if we start critically thinking too much, we may come to realize just how dead wrong everything that they're telling us is, and thus soundly reject them. And thus they lose their position in our lives.
Wow. I need to check that book out. That's very interesting. One of the other things that comes to my mind, of course, if you look at the extreme left, they're really, they're communists, they're Marxist.
Yeah.
And mind you, I believe that system is used pragmatically. I don't think those at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, that their real true desire is communism in and of itself. It's a means to an end. I think it goes beyond that. But anyways, that being said, you look at the left and it's essentially communism / Marxism. I mean, a socialist is merely soft communist. Yes. And a Marxist is basically a communist who now has a gun, right? And is ready to use it. But one of the things in the Soviet Union that occurred was leading up to the really extreme measures that they used was that they stirred up these groups in dissent, the ones that they said were downtrodden by the czars and by the aristocracy and all that in Russia. And they stirred them up to revolt. And I mean, really, it's the same thing that happened in the French Revolution, right? I mean, it's happened in many revolutions. But they called them useful idiots. That was the term they used. And it sounds like an insulting term, but it's actually a very good term to use today if you explain the context anyways. Because what they ended up doing, of course, is once they got their revolution and once everything was overturned, is who were the first people to go? It was the useful idiots. That's really a lot of what I see happening today. And I see them even setting things up for that, even as it's happening with, and it's same things happening with the gay rights community, right? Is that ultimately, we have to sort of go back to their goal is, if we look at it from a biblical prophetic point of view, and I'm not going to really go down that trail too far, but if we look at the end time scenario as being a one world government, a one world religion, and all those different things, there's very few places in the world besides America that are in opposition to that. And America is certainly the strongest one that would be in opposition to that. And if we look back through history, go back to the early 20th century, and this actually ties into so many different things. The Rockefeller Foundation, one of the books they published, and they were talking about their goals. And this is what's interesting, is they were talking about setting up the kingdom of God on earth. Now, mind you, these people were not Christians. Okay. So then you have to say, because God is a generic word, right? It's like, well, which God are you talking about? Right. But one of their things in that writing and I wish I could remember the name of the book. It came out in the 30s. But one of the things they said in this book was that in order to set up this kingdom, in order to bring about this new order that they wanted, that they needed to destroy the Judeo-Christian foundation in America. And incidentally, one of the people directly connected to that, who I believe played a key role in doing that, was Alfred Kinsey, who's considered the father of the sexual revolution.
Okay.
He wrote a book in 1947 called Sex and the American Male, and I believe it was in 1951 he wrote a book called Sex and the American Female, where he took this cross-section of America, claimed it was a broad, general sort of study of, a sample of the general population of America, and looked at their sexual habits and basically posited them as the norm in this book, right? And so all these things he put out there in these writings saying like things like homosexuality and different sexual practices that at the time, unfortunately today, are considered sort of normal.
Yeah.
At the time were considered unimaginable.
Oh, yeah.
Up to and including child molestation, he claimed were norms based upon this cross-section, but the part he didn't put in his writings were that the people he studied were people in prison and prostitutes and drug addicts and things like that, and child molesters, including a Nazi who was over many of the concentration camps. And it came out in the early 80s that he had this relationship with this guy, and this particular Nazi was responsible, they think, for hundreds of children having horrendous things done to them.
Oh, my.
And anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. There's a very informative Christian documentary titled The Kinsey Syndrome that will get your blood boiling, but I think people should really see. It's done by a Christian filmmaker named Chris Pinto. But anyways, he actually, in that documentary, and I've seen other people who've also put out the evidence, that you see a direct tie between Alfred Kinsey and the foundation he was a part of, and groups like the Rockefeller Foundation. And so if they had a stated goal of tearing down the Judeo-Christian system in America, and then you have one of the key things that did that, the sexual revolution, you have to come to the conclusion that, well, maybe they engineered that. Maybe that was, things like the sexual revolution were a part of that. I mean, that's one of the big things we see today. And the reason I even went on to all that was I was talking about the militant homosexual rights movement in America today, and how I think that when you look at a movement like that and you look at a movement like Black Lives Matter and other ones that, like, say, what's the racist Latino group in America? Is it Aslan?
I have no idea. I didn't know it even existed.
Yeah, they basically say that all of North America was formerly part of this. It sounds pretty much like the Nazis. They say that they are the purest race and that all of North America was once part of that, and they're going to take it back. And the woman that Obama appointed as, I think she was appointed as a Supreme Court justice. The name will come to me later, but she's actually supportive of that movement, is connected to it. So that was one of the points of outrage that people had about him appointing her. The trail I was going down with that thought was that I believe these movements, ultimately, we as believers should see it for what I believe it is that all of these movements, in the bigger scheme of things,
yes,
they're being used as leverage points against what they would call the Judeo-Christian system in America, as a thing to overthrow it. And as I alluded to earlier with the thing that I was formerly a part of, we were so focused on fighting the homosexual agenda in America and gay marriage and all that kind of stuff. And I heard someone in an interview that sort of got me to thinking, who was formerly part of those sorts of movements back in the 60s and 70s. And she had pointed out that one of their goals was to infiltrate the church and to use it against itself. And she had made this point that got me to thinking about that one of the things they were attempting to do was to incite the Christians in America to oppose them to such a level that they could vilify them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that got me to thinking was, have we been in a complete error as Christians in America and are focusing on that issue so much and so strongly opposing it? And in doing that, did we actually empower it?
Well, in all honesty, I think we lost the fight for marriage when no-fault divorce was legalized. This is the whole thing about same-sex marriage being redefined to accommodate same-sex couples. this isn't the first time that marriage has been redefined in this country. It was redefined, like I said, when we first introduced no-fault divorce. And in that time, I don't think the church had much to say of anything on that matter, precisely because so many members in the church were already divorcing. As it was. They probably would have advocated for it just as much as anybody else. And failing to see how that logically leads to, okay, if consistency and longevity and permanence in a marriage is no longer intrinsic to the institution, what else can go with it? If we're going to get rid of permanence, why not get rid of the heterosexual union? Why not get rid of the monogamy of marriage? Which is why so many people are honestly thinking that polyamorous marriages are next on the line in our redefinition of that institution. So I think it was our failure from the get-go to uphold what exactly Scripture and God and Christ had told us about what the divine purpose of the union between a man and a woman was supposed to be, that we've allowed this kind of foothold into the institution, and now we really have no leg to stand on because we're a little bit late to the race.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it all builds upon each other. And I think that's sort of the conclusion I came to, that, we as Christians, we get caught up in these battles and these fights and this culture war. And we don't stop and look at ourselves and say, well, what have we done to bring this about? Formerly being part of a sort of dominionist congregation, to where we were all about, we've got to come up with these laws to make America holy again and all this stuff. And coming to this realization that you can't legislate morality. I mean, to a certain degree, let me correct myself. You can legislate morality, but you can't moralize the heart. You can't change the heart through that.
Exactly.
And that's been our error. And I think that part of we have to look at our motivations. And I think a lot of our motivations have been wrong. And I include myself in that, because in our hearts, we know that when sin, and we don't know what that threshold is, but when the sinful corruption reaches a certain point, we know in our hearts that judgment's going to come.
Right.
And I think, personally, I think that this is sort of getting to a point I was making earlier too, is that I think that what we see with this huge foothold that the sexual revolution has in America, and now today the homosexual sexual revolution has, I think it's part of that judgment.
Yeah, I think that, I honestly agree. I don't think the judgment is something that's going to be like a really sensationalist fire and brimstone spark show. We're living the beginning throes of the judgment right now.
Yeah, Romans 1, where Paul said, God, when we reject God as a creator, when we reject the things that are obviously apparent about him as a creator, that he's going to hand us over.
Hand us over to a destitute mind. And shoot, so many things going on right now with, especially things from the left, with the transgender bathroom policies and so many of the mantras shouted out by the Black Lives Matter movement and stuff. You have to be absolutely insane. Some people have said you have to have been dropped on your head as a baby in order to believe some of the things that these people are saying. It is absolute nonsense that even the tiniest modicum of rational critical thought would completely and easily refute. But we've been given over to such a reprobate mind that even that basic criticism is beyond us.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it sort of goes back to that thing I think a lot of us guys particularly find ourselves guilty of, and that's sort of this arrested development.
Yes.
I think people are operating like children. We're being basically treated like spoiled children.
Yeah.
And that goes across all racial groups.
Oh, yes.
Honestly.
Absolutely. No, there is not a single racial group out there that is free from this right now. It's more of it seems to me like an age group than a racial group that seems to be capturing this. But even, thank the Lord, there are people in, millennials like myself who have pierced through the darkness, to borrow your terms, and have seen this kind of deprivation, this kind of intellectual erosion that is going on in our generation. And we're taking a stand and saying we will not be a part of this. We're not going to be ruined like this. We will stand apart from it, and we will do everything we can to bring other people out of that destruction and just hope for the best.
Yeah, and in a weird sort of way, the extremism, there's almost an encouragement in it, going to the point you're hitting, is that I think the more extreme it becomes, the more apparent it becomes.
Yeah.
And the more that people who actually do have eyes to see and who are willing,
yeah,
I think then they are wide open to actually seeing the truth, because you can't deny it anymore. I mean, when you go back to the 80s and the 90s, things were so subtle that I know really, especially in the 90s, you had that shift, and yet it was a lot more subtle. And today, though, it's sort of come to fruition and become so apparent that you can't argue. You know, you have to pick a side. You know, I don't want to pick a side, but you know what I mean? Like, you have to choose. It's like, it's like the word says, choose this day who you will serve, right? When Elijah's challenging the priest of Baal. And so, I think there is some, a lot of things we've been talking about, they sound so negative, but I think there's hope in it. I really do. I think that we know prophecy is going to unfold. We know that things are going to happen the way they're going to happen. And I'm not one who believes in predeterminism. I don't believe that we're all fated to certain things. I mean, I believe we do live in a free will universe, but I do think there are things that God predestines. And I do also believe beyond that God, existing as he exists, could see all of the things that are going to unfold. So, and not to go down that rabbit trail either, but that's why I sort of refuse to get in the Calvinist / Arminianism argument, because I think both sides are right and wrong at the same time.
Yes.
It all depends on your relativistic point of view. Right?
Exactly. And that's kind of the reasons why I don't like to talk too much about the kind of eschatological discussions that are so popular among Christians today, because oftentimes I find that it does more damage than good, and that it in one way or another encourages us to, in a sense, abandon our post. We take up this bunker mentality where we just got to shun the field that we've been sent out to, and just hope and pray for the best that everything blows over. Instead of doing what Christ commanded us to do, to go forth and make disciples of nations, we're too busy trying to save our own skin from some imaginary, speculative threat that we think is going to befall us if we stay out in the field too long.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like, look back to Yeshua's time. Look at the Roman Empire and what they were doing. And
we've been in worse situations than this. That's one thing I've always said. Like, the church has faced far, far worse situations than anything that we've had to deal with in this country. And we still did not, adopt this bunker mentality. We're being kind of spineless in avoiding the challenges that are beset before us, knowing what we have accomplished so much in the past.
Yeah, and that goes back to a point I was making earlier about questioning our motivations in this culture war that we as Christians in America have been guilty of for so long. And I include myself in that because I formerly was. And that is when I said we need to question our motivations in doing that, because are we doing this because we think somehow we're achieving some good that God desires, or are we doing it because we want to be comfortable and continue our comfortable existence? And I'm of the opinion that it's the latter.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's funny, a bit of an anecdotal story was there was this Messianic rabbi from Russia who came over to America and spoke at this congregation. And he came with this pastor who had witnessed to him, and that's who helped lead him to Messiah, right?
All right.
And this Messianic rabbi, he was asked, what are they praying for over there in Russia?
Okay.
And you know what his answer was?
Hit me.
He said they were praying for America. And they said, really? You're praying for America? What for? He said they were praying for persecution in America. And there was this very awkward pause.
Oh, yeah.
And they said, why on earth are you praying for that? And he said, because you in America need that to truly turn to God, to have a true revival. And honestly, I don't want that. But
no, I don't either.
I think, unfortunately, we see that throughout history as being actually what does happen. If you look at Israel, every time they experience what true biblical revival is, which is essentially viewed as, biblically speaking, as being separated from God as death, and you're separate from God because you're committing idolatry and these abominations. And so that revival, of course, that's an English word anyways, but that term that's translated and rendered as revival was these instances of Israel turning back to God, therefore coming back to life. Yeah. And it was something God initiated and blessed, of course, but those were always intermixed with this oppression from another people, another nation that, of course, God allowed to do what they did so that Israel would turn back to him. Yeah. And if you look at countries like China and Russia today, the believers are exploding there.
Yes.
Even as they institute, like, I don't know if you heard the recent headline that Russia has now officially stated that any evangelism can only now go through the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And because they see what's happening. And it's like in China, I've seen video footage of it. There was this one particular congregation of believers in China that were literally meeting in this cavern underground.
Yeah.
And the temperature in there got to be like 110 or 20 degrees because of all the people in there.
Yeah.
And yet they're in there for hours worshiping and praising God. And when I saw that video, dude, all I could feel was ashamed.
Yeah.
Because I was like, we whine when we're in a church and the temperature gets just a little bit uncomfortable, right? Or
because all those hand fans are waving around and we're ready to go home.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm the first one that's guilty of that, man. I can't stand the sweat.
I'm like even having to put on shoes to go to church. Are you kidding me?
But, it's just one of those things, man. When you think about it, it's like those people that are there, they had to fight tooth and nail to get there. And they're going against all these threats. I mean, their lives could literally be ended. They could literally be in prison for the rest of their lives. So, I mean, they're 100% on fire for God. I mean, they have to be to accept that as a possibility.
Absolutely.
And I don't want to see that happen in America, but your logical, analytical mind sort of has to come to the conclusion that it's a state we're in, man. Ultimately, I think that's really, sadly, that's what we're going to see it having to take for that to happen, because our pattern clearly demonstrates that.
Yeah, it's an all too common trait of human nature that we don't really appreciate what we have until we lose it. So it does seem like we're going to have to completely and totally lose our religious freedoms and all of our freedoms over here before we realize, one, just how valuable they were to us and ultimately where they came from. And I thank the Lord have not had to go through such extreme measures in order to realize that for myself. And I'm really hoping and praying that that's part of my job as a disciple, to awaken other people to really appreciate what we have in this country and through the grace of God, what we have right now, and to take full advantage of that and to make the most of it. And I have to talk to myself that I don't think that I've made the most of all the opportunities that have been given to me, and I'm ashamed of that myself. And I really want to do everything I can to make sure that everyone else makes better of their situation than I've made of mine. Because if we keep going like this, then we're going to have all these great blessings taken away from us in the blink of an eye. And only that kind of tragedy will really awaken us to what we've had and what we've enjoyed and how valuable it was to us. And I think a good way to tie up this conversation is going back to that. One of the nonfiction books that I read most frequently, and I have read before and probably will read again, is Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he opened up that book with a comparison between two 20th century writers who had very different ideologies about where Western civilization was going to go. And those two writers were George Orwell and Aldous Huxley. And many scholars make the mistake of thinking that these two men had similar or identical ideologies about the way the Western world was going to go. But in all honesty, they were in many ways polar opposites. George Orwell's probably one of his most famous books was 1984, the book 1984, where he feared that the Western civilization was going to be taken over by this mind-controlling big brother that basically subjugates us into a state of oppression and forces us into a state where we will never be able to climb up from the heel of those who have power over us.
Yes.
Aldous Huxley, on the other hand, who's one of his more famous books was A Brave New World, he came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be the things that we hate, but the things that we enjoy that was ultimately going to bring us to ruin.
Yes.
And I'm seeing that over and over and over again, where it is through these leftist mentalities who try to tell us that, the whole world revolves around us and our personal feelings. And whatever we say and feel good about is what's ultimately good for us, but it's those very things that are ultimately ruining us. And I think Neil Postman summarized his introduction to his book saying thusly that George Orwell concluded that what we hate will destroy us, but Huxley believed that it is what we love that will ultimately destroy us. And Neil Postman was the sort of man who believed that Huxley and not Orwell was the one who was ultimately right. And even now, going over everything that we've gone over, I honestly believe that, yes, it is Huxley who will be proven right by the lessons of history.
Wow. I couldn't agree with you more, and I could not have said it any better. You're absolutely right. I think that's a great way to sum that up, and I think that is exactly what we see. And I think that's a great way to sort of reach a close here. I have both of those books. I think that's exactly what we see. All these things that we're told that we should love, that we're embracing, and it's exactly what's leading us to that very goal. And I think it's much easier for them to get us to that goal with the velvet glove rather than the iron fist.
Oh, of course, yes.
Now, they'll use the iron fist if they have to, and ultimately, I kind of think we're going to see both. I think in the end, we're going to see the iron fist.
Yes.
But they're going to get us there through the velvet glove.
Oh, absolutely. Every single iron fist in history was first introduced by a velvet glove, if you think about it.
Yes.
I mean, that's how Hitler came to power. That's how Stalin came to power. That's how Pol Pot came to power. That's how Mao Zedong came to power. That's how so many Roman dictators and oppressors came to power, is because they introduced themselves as, to use biblical terms, an angel of light at first, until ultimately they revealed themselves to be nothing more than a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes, absolutely. And I think on that whole note, one of the things I think I really consistently want to get through to people, those of us who are believers, I try to do my show in a way that I could speak to both believers and non-believers. I don't want this to exclusively be, of a quote religious flavor.
Absolutely.
But that being said, one of the things I want to get to believers, I try to on every show, is the key thing, because we can look at all these different things that are happening around us. And trust me, man, I'm the guy since I got a computer. When I was 18, I started delving into the quote conspiracy realm and the sorts of things that are going on around us. And I think a lot of them are. I did a show on this topic. But at the end of the day, just like I said earlier, prophecy is going to be fulfilled. Events are going to play out. And we as believers, the key is not for us to see these things and to somehow stop them like we're trying to do. But the key for us is to see them and refuse to be part of it, to be separate from it. That little phrase, in the world, but not of the world.
Of course.
And I think that isn't even the goal in and of itself. The goal is enabled by that. And the goal is for us to reach out to those who are part of it and show them the truth, to share the Messiah with them. And I made this point before, man, the very one thing that he told us to do is the thing that we're refusing to do collectively. And that is to tell people about him and to show them his love.
Exactly.
And I'm going to end my rant there and just give you the opportunity. Any more thoughts you want to share in closing? Any sort of grandstand you want to make?
Well, certainly. And it's not so much the fact that we don't want to tell them about him, is that we're not doing it in a tactful and intellectual and rigorous manner. We're not doing it in such a way that we're actually winning people over. We're doing it in such a way, in my mind, to just boost our own egos.
Yes.
To basically just be pious, to wear that robe of piety and feel comfortable in that while not actually helping the people that we have been called to help. And I think that ultimately those are the kinds of people that Christ ultimately said that will preach in his name and prophesy, and ultimately he will say to them, I never knew you, and get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. And I'm always thinking almost daily that I will not be one of those people that our Lord has to say that to, because I was doing things for myself instead of to the least of his people that he has commanded us to serve and help.
Wow, you're right about that. So in closing, two things. One, if anybody wants to contact you, anything like that, or if you have any web presence that you'd like to put out, you could shoot that out there. And two, before we go, I'd like to give you the opportunity, if you'd like, to say a closing prayer.
Certainly, yes. I think you can put all my contact information in the description of wherever you're going to post this. That's probably the best way that they'll be able to reach me.
Okay.
But certainly, if you want me to close in prayer, I'd be more than happy to do so. Yes, dear Lord Almighty, we thank you for everything that you have done for us. You continue to do for us. You will do for us. You do so much for us, as is written. Even if we had 1,000 tongues, we could not thank you enough. I thank you for the opportunity of my good friend Micah bringing me on to speak on such a multitude of important topics. And I really pray that both of us have really fulfilled the responsibilities that you have bestowed upon us as disciples, as people who have been called into the world to serve the world and bring it in reconciliation with you. I pray over all the situations and hardships that are going on in our very society, that you give us all wisdom and serenity about what particularly you would have us do on an individual level to be able to better the situation and help to bring those who are lost in this darkness out from that darkness and into the light and freedom and love of your salvation through your Son. I pray right now that all of us will be kept safe, that this heat that we've been having recently will not bring about any critical health conditions for anybody. It's been really, really hot these last few days, and I pray that everybody will be protected and kept safe through that tribulation of its own. We thank you, Lord. Thank you. We thank you. We thank you. We will constantly thank you for everything that you have done for us and will continue to do for us. And it is in your blessed Son, Christ's name, that we pray. Amen.
Amen. And Father, it occurs to me, Lord, I just want to ask you, first, I want to thank you for just bringing us together, Lord, and for giving us opportunity to speak and talk about these things, Lord. And I want to thank you for Tyrone, Lord. I want to thank you for his friendship and just for the wisdom and insight he shared. And Lord, I just ask that you would bless him, Lord, that you would keep him, Lord, that you would just answer the things that need to be answered in this time for him, Lord, that you would just bless him in what he's doing, Lord, and that any doors that need to be open, Lord, that you would just clearly illustrate those, Lord, and that any that should be shut, that you would do the same. And Father, we just ask that you would bless all those that are listening to this show, Lord, that it would be received in the way that you would have it received. And we just thank you for this time that you've given us and this ability you've given us to share these things. In Yeshua's name, amen.
Amen.
Breaking the Silence is a production of Fight the Lies Ministries. Visit us at ftlradio.net. This program is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Intro and outro music by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com.